Okay, so what if the most natural thing in the world, having a child, was just impossible for you? Today, we're diving into the incredible human story of a couple who went up against biology, took a massive risk, and literally changed the world with the birth of the very first baby conceived through IVF.
Just think about that for a second. That dream of starting a family, something so basic, is blocked by a medical wall. How far would you go? What would you be willing to risk for that chance? Well, that was the reality for a British couple back in the 1970s.
So, at the very heart of this huge scientific revolution, you've got two totally ordinary people, Leslie and John Brown. And their story, it doesn't really start with science. It starts with hope, with not giving up, and with this incredibly powerful desire to have a baby. 9 years. Let that sink in for a moment. That's how long Leslie and John tried. 9 whole years of waiting and hoping and dealing with that quiet kind of heartbreak that, honestly, so many people go through. Now, their struggle wasn't some big mystery. They knew exactly what the problem was. Leslie had blocked fallopian tubes, which just made natural conception impossible for them. And you have to remember, back then, a diagnosis like that, well, that was pretty much the end of the road. But then, for the Browns, this new, kind of radical and completely unproven idea came along. It was this little glimmer of hope from a small team of pioneers who were really pushing the limits of what anyone thought was possible. So what was this radical new idea? It was called in vitro fertilization, or IVF. The concept was as simple as it was revolutionary. If you can't get conception to happen inside the body, well, why not try it outside? The idea was to fertilize an egg with sperm in a lab and then place it back in the mother's womb. Yeah, it sounds super complex, but it really just boils down to 3 main steps. 1, conception happens outside the body. 2, the new little embryo develops for a few days in the lab. And 3, that tiny embryo gets transferred back to the mother to, hopefully, grow. Now, here's a fun fact. We've all heard the phrase test tube baby, right? It's super catchy and it definitely stuck. But it's not actually correct. The conception didn't happen in a test tube at all. It was actually in one of those little flat dishes you remember from science class, a petri dish. This whole amazing thing was the work of this small, really dedicated trio. You had Patrick Steptoe, the surgeon. You had Robert Edwards, the physiologist, who figured out the fertilization part. And then there was Jean Purdy, the embryologist, who, get this, was the very first person in the world to see Louise Brown's embryonic cells start to divide. Incredible. But here's where the story gets really intense. Leslie and John knew this was an experiment. They knew it was a long shot. What they didn't know was that every single try before them had failed. They were walking into this completely blind, with absolutely no proof that it could even work. The leap of faith they took was just massive. So, after taking this unbelievable risk, with the entire medical community basically holding its breath, the big question was, could this actually be the one? Would it finally work? The procedure happened on November 10th, 1977. And then came the wait. Can you imagine that agonizing 9-month pregnancy just filled with so much uncertainty? And then, finally, on July 25th, 1978, the moment came. And there she was, Louise Joy Brown, born healthy, weighing 5 pounds, 12 ounces. She was perfect. And with her very first cry, the world of medicine was changed forever. Of course, her birth kicked off this huge global debate about ethics and science. But even major figures like Cardinal Albino Luciani, who was about to become Pope John Paul I, really hit on the human side of it all. He basically said, you can't condemn parents who just really wanted to have a baby. So what happens when the cameras go away and the headlines fade? I mean, being the world's first test tube baby has got to be a pretty heavy label to grow up with. What did life actually look like for Louise Brown? The answer, and this is the best part, is a wonderfully, beautifully normal life. Louise grew up, she fell in love, she got married, and in this amazing twist, she ended up having 2 kids of her own, and she conceived them both naturally. The medical marvel didn't just create a person, it created a totally normal family. And this just proves it wasn't some one-off fluke.
Louise's younger sister, Natalie, was also an IVF baby. And then, in 1999, Natalie became the very first IVF baby to give birth herself, creating this whole generational legacy for this brand new science. But the impact goes so far beyond just one family. The journey that the Browns took, it lit the fuse for a medical revolution that has brought hope and babies to millions of people all over the world. There's no overstating it, really. Today, the birth of Louise Brown is seen as one of the most important medical breakthroughs of the entire 20th century. It just blew the doors open for so many people and completely redefined what was possible. And over the years, the official recognition started to roll in. Robert Edwards won the Nobel Prize in 2010. In 2019, Time magazine put Leslie Brown on a cover, naming her a Woman of the Year for 1978. And finally, in 2022, Jean Purdy's huge contribution was recognized with a plaque. It was about time. When you think about it, the story of Louise Brown is just this powerful reminder that what seems impossible today can become totally possible tomorrow. What started as this one family's desperate hope is now a routine miracle for millions. And it kind of leaves you with a big question. What medical impossibility of today is going to be a normal part of our lives tomorrow?